My name is Eleanor Hart, and I never imagined that the most painful day of my life would also be the moment someone tried to strip me of my dignity. It was the morning of Robert's funeral. The church was quiet, the organ humming softly in the background, while I sat in the front pew with my hands folded tightly in my lap. I had chosen my dress with care. It was black, modest in shape, elegant in its cut, something that spoke of quiet respect, not show. As I sat there, trying to hold myself together, I could feel the weight of eyes on me, not in sympathy, but in judgment. My daughter-in-law, Madison, had decided that my appearance was open for ridicule. She carried herself with a kind of disdain that filled the room. In her mind, my dress was cheap, beneath the standards she claimed to live by. I could sense her words rippling through the congregation, drawing whispers and uneasy glances. My son Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside her, but he said nothing. My daughter Claire reached out to touch my arm, urging me silently not to let the cruelty sting too deeply. Inside, I reminded myself of Robert's words that had guided me through so many storms. Kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. So I lowered my eyes and remained silent. To those watching, I might have looked broken, but the truth was very different. My silence was not surrender, it was strategy. And Madison had no idea who she was truly mocking. That day was only the beginning. When the service ended, I kept my composure and walked out of the church. People whispered condolences, and I nodded politely, though inside, I carried more than grief. Madison's laughter still echoed in my ears. To most of those guests, I must have looked like a widow clinging to her modest little life. They saw me step into an aging Toyota sedan, a 2014 model that blended into the parking lot like a shadow. And I let them believe that was all I had. I've always lived with the quiet comfort of knowing appearances could protect me. That car was not my only one, not even close. In a garage across town, under heavy covers, sat a Bentley, a Mercedes S-Class, and a Porsche. But that secret was mine to keep. I preferred to move unseen, to choose a life that looked ordinary. Back in my apartment, I slipped off the black pumps that Madison had sneered at, pumps that had been handcrafted for $12,000. I placed them carefully in their box, as if I were putting away part of my armor. I poured a glass of red wine, leaned against the counter, and thought of Robert. His voice came back to me as if he were still sitting at our kitchen table. Never let kindness be mistaken for weakness. That sentence had carried me through so many storms. That night, it felt heavier than ever. Because while the world saw me as a simple widow in a clearance rack dress, I knew the truth. I was far from powerless. And soon, Madison was going to learn exactly how wrong she had been. Later that night, when the apartment grew still and the city outside had quieted, I walked to the old oak bookshelf in my living room. Most people thought it was only there to hold family photographs and dusty novels. But I knew better. My hands found the worn edge of the third shelf, and with a little pressure, the hidden latch clicked. The entire case shifted open with a low groan, revealing the doorway to the life I had kept hidden for decades. The moment I stepped inside, the air carried the faint scent of cedar and leather. This was my private study, a room even my children had never seen. The walls were lined with framed photographs, Robert standing proudly beside me at the opening of our very first boutique. Ribbons stretched across the doorway. I could still feel the energy of that day, the nervous excitement, the way we clung to each other for courage. Stacks of documents filled the cabinet's corporation papers, property deeds, contracts with designers across the country. On my desk lay fabric swatches, sketches of new collections, and letters written in Robert's careful handwriting. Together, we had transformed a single rented stall into 17 luxury boutiques and 3 textile factories. What Madison mocked as cheap was, in truth, the very creation of my life's work. Each button on that dress cost $500 not because of price, but because of craftsmanship, precision, and respect for detail. That dress represented values she could not see. I sat at the desk and let my hand rest on one of the earliest contracts. It reminded me of late nights when Robert and I struggled to cover rent, when all we had to rely on was each other's grit. Respect had always been our guiding principle. Not wealth, not appearances, respect. And that principle was exactly what Madison had trampled on. It was then I knew this was no longer about a dress. It was about protecting the legacy Robert and I had built, and I was ready to act. The next morning, I reached for the phone I reserved only for business. Very few people had that number, but one of them was Jordan Lee, my trusted assistant. Over the years, Jordan had become more than an employee. He was the quiet strength who kept our company running with order and integrity. When I heard his steady voice on the other end, I felt the familiar sense of calm. I told him there was a matter I needed handled delicately. It involved Madison. I asked him to review her employment record and give me the truth without sugarcoating. Hours later, he called me back with details I had suspected but hoped not to hear. She had 3 warnings for tardiness. Clients had lodged complaints about her sharp attitude. Her supervisor, Carla Benton, had noted that she often acted as though she were above customers, dismissing anyone who didn't fit her idea of status. I was not surprised, but I was disappointed. To me, customer respect had always been the lifeblood of our boutiques. Without it, even the finest silk or the most intricate lace became meaningless. Madison was not simply rude to me, she carried that same arrogance into her work. Jordan didn't stop there. By noon, he sent me a folder of public records. I learned that Madison and Ethan were living in an apartment far beyond what her salary could sustain. Their credit card debt had swelled past $4,000. A car loan added another $22,000. And most troubling, they had just applied for a mortgage on a $4 million home, counting on her so-called upcoming promotion to secure it. It wasn't poverty that fueled her cruelty. It was pretense. Hollow living. Robert used to call it building a house of cards, and I could already see it trembling. I decided then that timing would matter. I would wait for the right moment to act. By Friday morning, I knew it was time to see things with my own eyes. I dressed in the most unassuming way I could manage: a gray cardigan, plain flats, and a handbag so modest it would never draw attention. I wanted to blend in, to walk into the flagship store downtown as any ordinary customer might. The boutique gleamed under soft lighting. The scent of fresh leather and polished wood lingered in the air. Associates moved gracefully across the floor, greeting clients with warmth, offering water, adjusting displays. It was the kind of atmosphere Robert and I had always envisioned, where every person felt seen and valued. But as I watched, one detail stood out like a discordant note. Madison leaned against the counter, her phone pressed to her ear. She laughed loudly, the kind of laugh that drew attention not to joy, but to indifference. Just a few steps away, a silver-haired woman stood patiently, clutching a scarf she clearly wished to ask about. Madison ignored her, still lost in her call. The older woman waited a moment longer, then quietly walked away toward another associate who greeted her immediately with a smile. My heart ached at the sight. I had built this brand on respect, and here was someone tearing at that foundation with every careless gesture. I stayed silent, choosing to observe. Madison eventually ended her call, her eyes brushing past me as though I were just another distraction, not worth her time. I didn't need to speak to know what I had already confirmed. Her arrogance wasn't reserved for me alone. It spread to anyone she believed was beneath her. And in that moment, I knew the stage was being set for what had to come next. Not long after, the moment arrived. I returned to the flagship store, this time prepared not just to observe, but to act. I moved quietly through the entrance, still dressed like any other customer, my gray cardigan wrapped snugly around me. My heart was calm, though beneath the calm was steel. As I lingered near the displays, Madison finally noticed me. She put on a rehearsed smile, the kind she reserved for those she believed didn't belong, and tried to usher me toward a rack she thought was more appropriate for my budget. I let her chatter, let her assumptions roll off me. Every second was confirmation of the truth I already knew. Then the shift happened. Jordan Lee entered the boutique. His presence was professional but commanding, and I felt the room tilt as he walked toward me. In a clear voice, he addressed me as Mrs. Hart. The silence that followed was heavy. Madison's face drained of color. For the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. I straightened my shoulders and allowed the truth to settle in. I was not just her mother-in-law. I was the founder and owner of every boutique she worked for, including this flagship she bragged about ruling one day. Around us, employees exchanged startled glances. The reality of who I was had landed. Jordan and Carla, the store manager, presented the file of her misconduct. I didn't need to repeat the details. I only remembered the ache in my chest as they laid out the list of moments where she had dismissed customers, wasted hours on her phone, and treated the brand as though it were hers to cheapen. When it was over, I spoke from the place Robert and I had built our empire on respect. I reminded everyone listening that true dignity is not measured by titles, cars, or clothing labels. Respect is measured by how we treat people, especially those with nothing to offer us in return. Madison's career ended that day, not with cruelty from me, but with accountability she had brought upon herself. And as the silence lingered, I knew this was only the beginning of a deeper reckoning at home. After that confrontation, I knew I couldn't hide the truth from my son any longer. Ethan had stood silently at the funeral, torn between loyalty to his wife and discomfort at her cruelty. He deserved to understand the reality of the family he was born into, the legacy Robert and I had built. I invited him to the apartment the next afternoon. He arrived looking weary, shoulders slumped, his eyes avoiding mine. For years, I had let him believe I lived modestly with nothing more than a pension and savings. That illusion had shaped the way he chose his life, his marriage, even his definition of success. But it was time to lift the veil. We sat in the living room, and I walked to the oak bookshelf. My hand pressed the hidden latch, and the shelf swung open just as it always had. Ethan froze. His eyes widened, and I saw disbelief wash over him. Inside, he found the photographs of our first boutique, the contracts that had kept the doors open, the financial statements that stretched into millions. I explained how Robert and I had chosen to live quietly so our children would learn the value of work, respect, and humility without leaning on wealth. I told him this was never about money. It was about giving him and Claire the chance to grow into grounded, compassionate adults. Then I handed him the folder containing Madison's record, the complaints at work, the arrogance toward clients, the debts she had hidden, and the memory of her mocking me at his father's funeral. I didn't tell him what choice to make. Instead, I asked him to look at the truth and decide the kind of man he wanted to become. The silence between us was heavy, but in that silence, I saw the beginning of a reckoning he could no longer avoid. Not long after sharing the truth with Ethan, I asked both of my children to come home. Claire arrived with her usual calm presence, carrying a casserole dish as if to soften whatever conversation lay ahead. Ethan came too, his expression heavier than before, as though he was still trying to process the reality I had revealed to him. We gathered in the living room. On the coffee table lay 2 envelopes I had prepared long ago, though I had never been certain when the right time would come to open them. Now, with Robert gone and the cracks in our family exposed, I knew the moment had arrived. I told my children that their father and I had not built our empire just for profit. We built it to protect the values we believed in: respect, humility, responsibility. And those values had to be at the heart of anything they inherited. I handed the first envelope to Ethan. Inside were instructions he would inherit the boutiques and factories, but only if he spent 5 years working at every level of the business. Beginning as a floor associate, he would learn what it meant to serve customers with patience and dignity. The second envelope went to Claire. She would inherit the properties and investments, but with the condition that a portion must fund education programs for children who needed it most. I looked at both of them and laid down one final rule: if either of them ever used wealth to belittle others, they would lose everything. The inheritance would vanish as quickly as it appeared. It was not money I was leaving them. It was the responsibility of carrying forward the principles Robert and I had lived by. Months later, I visited the flagship boutique again. This time, not to confront, but to see how far Ethan had come. He was standing behind the counter, dressed in the standard associate uniform, his posture straighter than I had seen in years. When he noticed me, his face lit up with a genuine smile, the kind of smile I hadn't seen since before Robert's passing. I asked him how the work was going, and he admitted it was harder than anything he had ever done. For the first time, he was learning the weight of long hours on the floor, of customers who came in carrying not just wallets, but insecurities, hopes, and stories. He told me about a woman who had come in just the day before, a widow, much like me, who looked nervous as if she didn't belong in a place filled with polished glass and soft music. At first, he felt the instinct to send her toward the clearance rack, just as Madison once had done to others. But then he caught himself. Instead, he walked with her slowly, asked her about her day, and treated her as though she were the most important guest in the store. She left with only a scarf that cost $50, but her smile when she walked out the door had made him feel something new. Hearing him share that moment, I felt my chest warm with pride. That was exactly what Robert and I had always hoped our children would understand, that respect is priceless, and dignity comes not from what we buy, but from how we are treated. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope rising again in our family's future. It was late one evening when my phone rang. The house was quiet, the city lights flickered outside my window, and for a moment I thought about letting the call go unanswered. But something inside nudged me to pick it up. On the other end was Madison. Her voice was nothing like the sharp, mocking tone I had endured at Robert's funeral or inside the boutique. It was fragile, unsteady, carrying the weight of someone who had finally come face to face with herself. She admitted she had made mistakes, though I could hear she still struggled to name them fully. She spoke of losing her job, of Ethan pulling away, of the walls of her carefully crafted image collapsing around her. I listened in silence. Part of me ached, not from pity, but from the recognition that brokenness can sometimes be the first step toward growth. She told me she wanted another chance, that she could change, that she finally understood respect wasn't about labels or appearances, but about the way we treat people when no one else is watching. When she finished, I didn't offer her forgiveness. Forgiveness, I knew, wasn't something that could be given like a key to unlock the past. Instead, I told myself that honesty was her first real step, and that if she chose to hold on to it, she might someday learn what dignity truly meant. After we hung up, I stood by the window and looked out at the fading skyline. Robert's words echoed in my heart once again. Kindness is not weakness. And for the first time, I felt that lesson settling into every corner of our story. As I look back now, I see the winding path our family has taken through grief, betrayal, truth, and quiet redemption. Robert's passing had already left a hollow space in my heart, and Madison's cruelty threatened to deepen that emptiness. Yet through it all, his words kept me steady. Kindness is not weakness. That lesson carried me through every choice I made when I stayed silent at the funeral, when I revealed the study to Ethan, when I laid down conditions for their inheritance, and when I stood firm as Madison faced the consequences of her own actions. None of it was easy, but respect, dignity, and humility were worth protecting, even if it meant enduring the pain of confrontation. I think often about the small moments the widow who left Ethan's store with a simple scarf, the quiet way Claire has dedicated herself to teaching, the fragile honesty in Madison's late-night call. Each of these moments reminded me that respect is not about wealth or titles. It is about seeing people as human, even when they have nothing to give in return. And so I share this with you, not as a story of revenge, but as a story of values. Appearances deceive. True elegance is not stitched into a dress, parked in a garage, or written into a will. True elegance begins with how we treat others. If this story made you pause for even a moment, if it made you think about how you view respect in your own life, I would love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me about a time you were judged unfairly or learned the value of kindness. And if this story touched your heart, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of what truly matters.